The sound was not artillery this time. It was quieter, the soft scrape of a pen across paper, the dull clink of glass in rooms far from the front, the low murmur of men speaking not of divisions or casualties, but of credit shipping lanes, reserves, obligations. While Europe burned, something else was moving beneath the smoke slow. Deliberate, irreversible. London still looked like the center of the world. Even under blackout, even scarred by bombing, it carried itself with the memory of command. The Union Jack still flew over ports that once ruled oceans. The language of diplomacy was still English. The maps still bore the outlines of an empire on which the sun had once refused to set. But beneath the surface, the weight had shifted. The city felt older now, tired in a way no amount of resolve could conceal. Across the Atlantic, the nights were quieter. Factories glowed instead of burning. Shipyards rang with steel and motion, not alarms. Trains ran on time, heavy with goods that crossed an ocean, increasingly shaped by one reality. Britain no longer paid in power, it paid in promises. The war demanded everything. Men, machines, fuel, food. Britain had given these things 4 years, bleeding them out across continents, oceans, skies. What it no longer had was margin. Each convoy lost was not only a military setback but a financial wound. Each bombed factory was not just rubble, but debt waiting to be named. The United States watched, calculated, supplied. They spoke the language of allies, but acted with the precision of accountants. Destroyers, 4 bases. Loans wrapped in lifelines. Agreements written in ink that would outlast the war itself. No troops marched under American flags into British cities. No shots were fired between them. And yet, with every signature, something ancient slipped away from London. Gold crossed the Atlantic in silence.
Not every shift in power is marked by battlefield. Some empires fade quietly, while others rise without resistance. After the war, Great Britain did not lose its dominance in a final confrontation. It was replaced through debt, institutions, and a world that no longer revolved around the empire. This channel does not focus on conquest. We examine influence, how economics, diplomacy, and timing can draw the global order without a single shot being fired. I'm Rayo, and here we don't just watch power change hands. We reveal how history does it in silence.
Vaults emptied. Reserves that had anchored a global system flowed westward, converted into leverage rather than security. The pound weakened. Quietly, almost politely. The dollar did not announce its rise. It simply became necessary. Necessary for fuel, necessary for steel, necessary for survival. Institutions followed money, the way shadows follow light. Boards shifted. Decisions began to pass through rooms in Washington instead of Westminster. The war economy demanded coordination, and coordination demanded authority. Britain still planned, still commanded. But increasingly, it asked first, and asking, once it becomes habit, reshapes power more deeply than defeat ever could. On paper, Britain remained a victor. Its armies fought on. Its cities endured. Its leaders spoke with the gravity of those who had held the world together once before. But the empire's arteries were thinning. India stirred, Africa what? The colonies listened closely, sensing that something fundamental had changed. Power was no longer projected solely by fleets and flags. It moved through currencies, through production, through institutions designed not for conquest, but for permanence. The United States did not need colonies. It built systems instead. Bretton Woods was still only an idea, not yet named, but its logic was already forming. A world rebuilt on rules written by those who could afford to rebuild it. A world where stability required access, and access required alignment. Britain would help design it, but it would not own it. The war accelerated everything. What centuries of rivalry had failed to resolve, exhaustion now settled quietly. British bases became American footholds. Temporary, they were called wartime necessities. But concrete poured has a memory longer than treaties. Runways carved into foreign soil did not vanish when peace arrived. They remained humming softly, projecting reach without declaration. Soft power followed hard necessity. Hollywood's images traveled where imperial proclamations no longer did. Music, language, ideals filtered through screens, and radios began to redefine aspiration. Britain's culture had once set the tone of global legitimacy. Now it shared the stage with something younger, louder, relentlessly confident. Even victory carried the taste of dependence. By the time the war turned decisively, by the time Allied momentum became unstoppable, the structure beneath that momentum was unmistakable. British generals still planned operations. British soldiers still fought with discipline and sacrifice. But the scale, the overwhelming scale, came from elsewhere. Ships, planes, fuel, food. The war's pulse beat strongest not in Europe, but across an ocean. This was not betrayal. It was an empire built on trade could not survive a war that consumed trade faster than it could be restored. Britain had mortgaged its future to survive the present. And survival, though heroic, carries a price. When the war ended, there were celebrations. Bells rang, crowds filled streets. The enemy was defeated, the flags still flew. But beneath the noise, the silence was already setting in. Britain emerged victorious and bankrupt. Its cities stood, but its finances did not. Its empire existed, but its authority did not. The United States emerged untouched at home, dominant abroad, holding not territory, but trust, credit, and institutional gravity. The transfer had already happened, not with parades, not with declarations, but with balance sheets, agreements, and habits formed under pressure. Britain did not fall. It yielded, slowly, to the logic of a world that no longer revolved around imperial reach, but around systemic control. And the most remarkable part was not that it happened, it was that almost no one noticed when it did. The war had taught the world how fragile power was when tied solely to force. The peace would teach it something else, entirely, that the strongest empires of the future would not conquer. They would organize. They would ensure. They would lend. And as the smoke cleared over Europe, as ruins cooled and nations counted their dead, a new center of gravity settled quietly into place, ready to shape the next century without ever needing to announce itself. Because power, when it truly changes hands, does not announce itself with trumpets. It waits until the old center grows accustomed to asking for permission. In the months after the war, Britain still spoke as a victor, but its voice carried an unfamiliar hesitation. The empire had survived the storm, yet it stood exhausted on the shore, watching the tide move outward, pulling resources, influence, certainty away from it. The war had not destroyed Britain's armies. It had hollowed out its capacity to decide alone. The United States, meanwhile, did not celebrate restraint. It built where Europe saw ruins, Washington saw structure. Where Britain saw recovery, America saw design. Reconstruction was not treated as charity, but as architecture. Money flowed west to east, but it moved with conditions embedded inside it, conditions that shaped policy, currency, alignment. The Marshall Plan did more than rebuild cities. It rewired dependence. Dollars replaced pounds, not by decree, but by convenience, by stability, by inevitability. The pound had once anchored trade across continents. Now it floated, weakened by debt and obligation. Sterling zones contracted. The dollar, backed by untouched industry and swollen reserves, became the language in which Reconstruction spoke. Nations did not abandon Britain out of disloyalty. They followed solvency. They followed predictability. They followed the system that worked. Institutions solidified this shift. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, new names, neutral on the surface, technocratic in tone. But power rarely sounds like domination when it is confident. These institutions did not fly flags. They set rules, and the rules assumed one thing without saying it aloud. The center of gravity now lay across the Atlantic. Britain had a seat at the table. But it was no longer setting the table. Its leaders understood this, even when they could not yet admit it publicly. Each negotiation carried a subtle asymmetry. Britain needed access. The United States offered it. Britain sought stability. America defined its terms. This was not coercion. It was alignment, enforced by reality. The empire began to loosen at its edges. India did not fall. It left quietly. formally, with ceremonies and signatures but beneath them, the truth was unmistakable. Britain no longer had the strength to insist. The cost of control exceeded the benefit. The world had changed, and the empire's logic no longer fit inside it. Across Africa, across Asia, the same calculation spread. Independence movements felt the moment even before London did. Empires do not collapse when they are defeated. They collapse when they can no longer afford to remain. Military bases told the story more honestly than speeches. British installations closed. American ones expanded, not always dramatically. Sometimes they simply stayed after the war was supposed to end. Temporary arrangements hardened into permanent presence. Runways, ports, logistics hubs nodes, in a network that did not require colonial administration to function. This was power without occupation. The United States did not rule territories. It ruled access. 2 markets, 2 security, 2 capital. Nations aligned not because they were conquered, but because the alternative was isolation. The new empire did not draw borders. It defined pathways. Soft power completed what economics began. American culture arrived everywhere, not as instruction, but as invitation. Music, film, language, ideals broadcast not from governors' offices, but from screens. Britain's cultural authority had once rested on tradition and prestige. America's rested on momentum, on youth, on the promise of belonging to the future rather than inheriting the past. Even Britain's elites began to look westward. Education, finance, security. Decisions increasingly referenced Washington as the final variable, not out of subservience, but because Washington had become the place where outcomes converged. The empire that once dictated global norms now adapted to them. And still, no shots were fired. No treaties declared surrender. No flags were lowered in defeat. Britain remained proud, sovereign, influential, but influence is not hegemony. And hegemony had moved. The final confirmation came not in Europe, but in Croesus. When the Suez Canal flared into confrontation, Britain acted as it always had, decisively, forcefully, with imperial reflex. And for a moment, it looked familiar. Troops moved, plans unfolded, power asserted itself. Then the call came, not from an enemy capital, but from an ally. Financial pressure replaced military resistance. Currency vulnerability replaced battlefield risk. The message was simple, though never stated so plainly. This war would not continue without American consent. Britain stopped. Not because it had been defeated, but because it had been overruled by the system it now depended on. In that moment, the last illusion dissolved. The United States had not taken Britain's place by conquest. It had inherited it through structure, through endurance, through the quiet mastery of systems that outlasted wars themselves. This was how the modern world was shaped, not by the fall of an empire in flames, but by its gradual absorption into a larger, more efficient design. Britain had taught the world how to rule seas. America taught it how to rule systems. And the handover, once complete, felt almost natural. The world spoke a different language now, traded in different terms, planned its future around a different center. Britain remained part of that world, respected, allied, experienced, but no longer decisive. The United States did not replace Britain in a moment. It replaced it in meaning. Power had learned to move without marching. It had learned to win without firing a shot. The silence after Suez was heavier than any defeat Britain had known. There were no parades for restraint, no monuments to hesitation, only a quiet recalibration carried out behind closed doors, where ministers spoke less of glory and more of sustainability. The lesson had been delivered without cruelty, but without ambiguity. Force without financial independence was theater. Sovereignty without leverage was nostalgia. From that moment on, the pattern hardened. Britain adjusted. It did not resist. Resistance would have required resources it no longer possessed and an appetite for isolation it could not afford. Instead, it adapted with dignity, trading command for counsel, dominance for partnership. The empire's vocabulary softened. Influence replaced authority. Tradition replaced mandate. The world it had once ordered now moved according to mechanisms it no longer controlled. Across the Atlantic, the United States did not pause to reflect on what it had become. It simply continued, bases multiplied, not as symbols of conquest, but as guarantees of access, of response time, of presence without permanence. The map of the world filled with quiet nodes or fields, ports, listening posts, each one insignificant alone, together forming a lattice of reach that no empire before had achieved without annexation. Power no longer needed flags, it needed logistics. Money followed certainty. The dollar hardened into more than a currency. It became a measure of trust. Oil was priced in it. Debt was written in it. Recovery was negotiated through it. The world did not vote for this arrangement. It discovered that operating outside it was too expensive. Too slow? Too risky. Britain watched this happen with the clarity of someone who recognized their own invention perfected by another. The empire it had built was territorial, visible, enforced by ships and garrisons. The empire replacing it was abstract, invisible, enforced by incentives and rules. Britain had ruled by presence, America ruled by preference. Nations aligned not because they were ordered to, but because the system rewarded alignment and punished deviation, quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. This was the final evolution of power. It no longer needed to conquer dissent. It made dissent impractical. In the years that followed, crises came and went. Some flared into war. Others dissolved through pressure alone. Each time, the pattern repeated. Britain spoke with experience. America decided. With capacity, the old empire advised. The new one, under history textbooks, would later compress this transition into paragraphs, into dates and conferences and agreements. They would name Bretton Woods NATA, the post-war order, as if systems emerged fully formed from ink and signatures. But the real transfer had already occurred long before those names were spoken. It had taken place in the margins where debts accumulated, where factories outproduced ruins, where endurance outlasted valor. The Second World War did not end British power. It exposed its limits. And it did not crown American power. It revealed its nature. This was not an empire driven by the need to be seen. It was an empire content to be necessary. Its strength lay in making itself unavoidable, in embedding itself so deeply into the functioning of the world that removal became unthinkable. Britain understood this with a clarity that came from loss without humiliation. It remained influential because it chose relevance over defiance. The special relationship was not sentiment, it was recognition. Recognition that the world Britain had once built now required a different custodian. The final handover did not happen on a battlefield or at a negotiating table. It happened in habit. In the habit of calling Washington first. In the habit of holding reserves in dollars. In the habit of designing institutions that assumed American stability as a constant. By the time anyone thought to ask when the change had occurred, it had already been normalized. The old empire faded not into obscurity, but into memory, its lessons preserved, its language adopted, its methods refined. The new power carried forward what worked and discarded what did not. It did not need to erase Britain to replace it. It needed only to outgrow it. And so, the 20th century turned. The world entered an era where power did not arrive with fleets on the horizon, but with contracts, standards, guarantees, where dominance was measured not by territory controlled, but by crises managed, where the strongest hand was the one steady enough to hold the system together. Britain had once taught the world how to rule the seas. The United States taught it how to rule the currents beneath them. No shots were fired between them. No flags were torn down. No victory was declared. And that is why the transfer was complete, because the most enduring shifts in history are not marked by noise, but by silence, by the moment when the old power realizes it no longer needs to be obeyed to be respected, and the new power realizes it no longer needs to be challenged to prevail. The war ended, the smoke cleared. The world woke up, organized differently, not because an empire fell, but because another learned how to hold the world together without ever needing to conquer it.